Hi, folks. This is Mark by Mark A. Foster, Ph.D., for the Institute for Dialectical Metarealism. The capitalist world system literally encircles the world. It is the dominant capitalist world system. It is the economic system for everyone in the world to one degree or another. Why? Because even in countries which are arguably not capitalist, capitalism rules over them. Capitalism rules over all of us. The profit motive. Adam Smith is sometimes regarded as the founder of capitalism. That can be debated because Adam Smith did not actually use the term capitalism, but he did talk about some of the basic principles upon which capitalism is based. One of those is the profit motive, or as Smith described it, the invisible hand. The idea is that somehow built into nature is an invisible hand which makes sure that everything works out correctly. As long as governments do not interfere with profit, do not attempt to control profit, basically leave individuals and companies alone, things will work out automatically. That somehow we have it in our natures, and perhaps the universe itself has it in its nature, the basic idea of profit, of capitalism, in effect, the invisible hand. When I was younger, I used to always wonder, why did Smith talk about an invisible hand? I mean, it sounds kind of esoteric, occult, arcane. Why didn't he pick a more sensible term? Until later, I learned about natural law theory, and then I understood. Natural law theory is really the foundation for Smith's invisible hand, because in natural law theory, there is in nature natural law, that it affects all of us, it dominates all of us, and it makes all of us conform to it. We are molded, both individually and collectively, by that natural law. And Smith, in effect, said that one aspect of that natural law is the invisible hand that makes the economy work out right, as long as we humans do not attempt to meddle in it. More particularly, as long as we humans do not attempt to control other humans. As long as governments, especially, do not attempt to control humans. So, government needs to be minimal. That does not mean that Smith thought that there should be no government at all, but he thought that the role of government should be very much reduced from what it was during his lifetime, and that government should basically stay out of business, not meddle in it, leave people alone to make a profit. And what was the assumption behind that? That all human beings are selfish. Nice, isn't it? All human beings are selfish. Really, what Roy Bhaskar, the founder of critical realism, would call demi-reality, or illusion, or disunity. To Adam Smith, that was the basis of natural law. Greed. We are all greedy individuals. And so, if we assume that, which I don't, obviously, then what better system could we have than what is now called capitalism or the free market system? A system which basically allows people to make money unfettered with no or very limited government intervention. And so that is basically where capitalism begins. And again, that can be debated, but that is my view. That is where capitalism begins with Adam Smith's Wealth of Nations and his other writings, where he elaborates upon that principle, the invisible hand. That is the foundation of everything that Smith wrote, that there is this invisible hand. You can see how that would sound kind of weird to a kid. An invisible hand? I mean, invisible in what sense? Where is it? Where does it exist? Is it ethereal? Is it a part of the kingdom of God? Actually, quite to the contrary. It is a part of the kingdom of man. It is the way in which we, as human beings, according to Smith, can have an effectively functioning economic system when we recognize the invisible hand that has sway over every single one of us. That is what Smith believed. So, that is the foundation of capitalism and the capitalist world system, as Immanuel Wallerstein called it. Capitalism as a world system really did not begin until the end of the 19th century, and it was made possible by shipping. The shipping industry, which now could carry goods from one continent to another. So it was no longer necessary for things to be produced in one's own neighborhood, in one's own community. Now you have globalization, the introduction of globalization, global capitalism. The capitalist world system is an expression or an explanation of how global capitalism operates. Global capitalism is very different from the capitalism which existed earlier, because there, factories were local and only local. And so if you made goods, those goods were sold to people around you. They were not sent to people in far-off lands. But that is not capitalism that developed at the end of the 19th century and continues now into the end of the first quarter of the 21st century. Capitalism now is firmly entrenched in the world. It is the standard by which everything is done. The ends of the Cold War basically established that capitalism, in a sense, had won. The Soviet Union collapsed. The Second World is now simply an anachronism. There is no more Second World because there is no more Soviet Union. There are some countries which could arguably be still called communist, but they are very far and few between. There are not that many communist countries left in the world, and they really don't have any kind of support from a global economic power, as was the case prior to the end of the Cold War. As to China, which still claims to be communist, it clearly is not. It can say it's communist all it wants. China, mainland China, is an authoritarian capitalist society. It makes a lot of stuff. China has good relations with both North Korea and South Korea. And the goods that are produced by South Korean companies are often manufactured in China, in mainland China. So China can claim anything it wants, but all one needs to do is to examine the reality. And the reality is that capitalism has taken over. We are living again in a capitalist world system. So, if capitalism is regarded as an invisible hand, as a kind of natural law which keeps the world moving, in this case, I guess, which keeps the economy moving, and more specifically, what Roy Bhaskar said, the founder of critical realism, is that the problem with the concept of natural law is that it is too static. It is too deterministic. It takes agency out of human behavior. It makes all behavior fatalistic. In other words, what we do is determined by the forces of nature. And Roy argued, and I agree with him, that what it does is it literally makes human beings the servants of nature. And so, in place of law, Roy proposed the concept of causal mechanisms, because causal mechanisms allow for agency. In other words, by our agency, we as humans can engage with nature. We can engage with the causal mechanisms into which we were born, and even change them, modify them through our own behavior. And so the causal mechanisms themselves are not necessarily fixed. We can change them through our own actions. And action is the key to understanding Roy Bhaskar's critical realism, because action or agency is what allows for nature to be a dynamic force, not a constraining one. So, regardless of whether one considers the market to be a set of causal mechanisms or a set of natural laws, in a sense doesn't really matter. Because once one accepts the supremacy of the market, one is buying into a system which has led to enormous poverty around the world. Enormous poverty in my own country, the United States. We have more poor people here in the United States per capita than any other first world country. That is shameful. The United States, the wealthiest country in the world, should not be in that situation, and yet we are. That is where we stand. That is where we stand. We remain the country with the highest rate of poverty, also the first world country with the highest rate of violent crime. America is kind of screwed up, maybe take kind of out, really screwed up. And I personally don't have much hope in it, which is why I am a Maoist third worldist, because I believe that revolutions really are not likely to start in the US or in other first world countries. If, and I emphasize if, because we don't know, but if we have revolutions in the future, those revolutions are likely to begin not in the first world, but in the third world. So let's take that idea and apply it to Greater West Asia, which again is West Asia plus Egypt in Africa. That's Greater West Asia, or the Middle East. Most countries in Greater West Asia are first world countries. They are wealthy countries that benefit enormously from the capitalist world system. On the other hand, when we turn to Palestine, which is not even a country, why? Because Israel has prevented it from becoming a country, and it still prevents it. There are repeated calls by other countries in the UN to allow Palestine to become a country. But at every turn, Israel objects, and the United States, which has veto power in the General Assembly, backs up Israel. And thus, we have the poorest region of West Asia surrounded by tons of wealthy first world nations. It should not be surprising, therefore, that Palestine gets almost no support from the Arab Gulf countries. Why would they? Why would they? Economically, they have nothing in common with them. Culturally, maybe they do, to an extent. Certainly more than they do with Israel. But Israel, economically, is also first world. And so it is advantageous for those Arab Gulf countries to enter into business partnerships with Israel, which is precisely what began to happen during the Trump administration. Jared Kushner was sent as a kind of emissary to Greater West Asia, and somehow he managed to convince them to eliminate their previous hostility toward Israel and instead to establish treaties with Israel. I'm not sure whether that is something actually that Kushner really accomplished. I think it's more accurate to say that Kushner, representing Trump, gave those countries permission to enter into relationships with Israel. And why wouldn't they, from an economic standpoint, from the standpoint of the capitalist world system, with all of its causal mechanisms constraining human behavior, and with very limited agency to escape those causal mechanisms? Why wouldn't those countries accept what Trump and Kushner was proposing? It was to their advantage, and so they did. Even Saudi Arabia, which has not officially established relations with Israel, has established relations with Israel. It's a game. It's just a game. I assume it's meant to appease the citizens of Saudi Arabia so they don't get outraged by it. Maybe that's just my guess. But for all intents and purposes, Saudi Arabia and Israel are friends. Economically, they are friends. Both are authoritarian countries. Despite the claims of Israel and the United States that Israel is the only quote unquote democracy, even bourgeois democracy, in Greater West Asia, it clearly is not. Israel is an authoritarian country surrounded by other authoritarian countries. I would even say that Israel may be the most authoritarian country of them all. So why would they care about Palestine? What incentive could possibly make them care about Palestine? I don't know. To be honest, I really don't think that there is any. And that is the quandary. That is the mess that we are caught in the first quarter of the 21st century. There seems to be no escape from capitalism, at least for now. But given the anger expressed by Palestinians against the capitalist world system, which again includes most of Greater West Asia, and given the anger expressed by other third world countries outside of Greater West Asia toward what Israel is doing, and those third world countries' support for Palestine, I hope that that is a good omen. By a good omen, I am not talking about superstition. What I mean is a sign, a hopeful sign that pretty soon, and what pretty soon means, I have no idea, but a good sign or an omen that revolutions to establish socialism or communism may begin relatively soon in the third world, relatively soon. And I think that the actions being taken by Israel right now as a part of the capitalist world system are hastening that day. So Israel may think it is acting in its own interests, and I assume it does, but I think the reverse is actually true. What Israel is doing right now to Palestine will soon lead to the demise of Israel. And what will happen when that demise occurs? Well, again, I hope that revolutions will begin throughout the world and throughout Palestine. If that happens, we will be on a good course to a more pleasant and more enjoyable future. If not, we will be left in the same mire that we are stuck in right now. And I, for one, do not want to see us stuck in that mire. I want revolutions to begin throughout the third world, and then for those revolutions to spread eventually from the third world to the first world. For the time being, this has been Mark, by Mark A. Foster, Ph.D., for the Institute for Dialectical Meta-Realism. Have a pleasant day and an even better day tomorrow.